So next up, we're going to be talking chemical communications. Chemical communications are one, how cells talk to each other, but also two, how a lot of insects talk to each other. So speaking of insects, we're going to be talking first about pheromones. So a lot of bugs use pheromones, but I'm going to be using ants as my main example because ants are probably the best at it. So one thing that ant colonies rely on are these pheromones that basically tell other ants what sort of ant this ant is. So we're going to just call him like a worker ant. So he's a worker ant, and then this guy behind him here is also a worker ant. So let's just say there are only 3 ants in the whole colony. So now we've got this ant, and he's picking up the pheromone that both of these guys are worker ants. So he's definitely not going to develop into a worker ant. He's probably going to develop into something like a drone instead, because they sense these different pheromones, and that tells them what different jobs are, and if there are too many ants on the same job, then the colony won't be able to function properly. So they built in this sort of defense system against colony collapse, basically, which bees don't have, and that sucks, but ants do have it, and it's pretty impressive. So next are hormones and neurotransmitters. So this is the sort of communication that we see in cells, how cells talk to each other. Firstly, only eukaryotic cells can do this because prokaryotic cells simply don't have the anatomy necessary to do it. So how hormones work is that they're released by some kind of central nervous system, which I'm pretty sure can only be a brain. So we're going to call that a brain. And then a hormone will get released from some gland in the brain, unless it's adrenaline, and that hormone travels indiscriminately throughout the entire body. Drawing this with one hand is very complicated, I'm sorry. So that hormone is going to travel through the entire body, and it's going to hit every single cell along the way, and then based on what kind of cell it is, it has different receptors that will cause a cell to do different things once the hormone binds to the receptor. So if you have, say, testosterone receptors across most of the body, when testosterone binds to it, it's going to tell that cell to grow more hair, basically, like that sort of thing. And then neurotransmitters are sort of similar because they are also coming from the brain for the most part. Well, actually, always. So neurotransmitters are going to be used between nerve cells. So this is how nerve cells talk to each other. So we'll just pretend that that's not the worst synapse ever drawn by a human. So these are neurotransmitters, probably dopamine. And then how these neurotransmitters get across is that an action potential, or electricity, is generated inside the axon, which pushes these neurotransmitters through the nerve cell onto the dendrites of the other nerve cell. And then based on that reception, it will either cause some kind of effect on like muscle cells, or it's just going to simply pass that signal to the next one, to the next one, to the next one, to the next one. So like when you go to move a muscle, that sort of process is happening. And then lastly, for chemical communication is going to be chemical signaling, which probably isn't the actual name of this process, but I couldn't find the actual name, so I'm calling it chemical signaling. And that's when you got a bunch of bacteria in a group, and these bacteria are constantly releasing chemicals that basically tell members of the same species that they're there, so they like know where they are. So this is going to be a population of bioluminescent bioluminescent bacteria. And so the group is fairly small, so they're not doing anything. But once a large number of this bacteria have like divided and are now present, it's like that this group is larger than this other one, and they're all still releasing the same chemical. So eventually what's going to happen is that they're going to turn on the genes that tell them to produce light, basically, is the basic process. And so it causes them to only brighten up when there are a large number of bacteria present. So that's chemical communication.